Culture, culture, culture. What if I told you there's reason to believe that a nation's well-being in some ways correlates to the degree its culture is shared or appreciated around the world? That sharing one's culture with those who negatively perceive you may actually be a step in the right direction towards mending affairs, and that if such claims are true, don't we then have the responsibility to create, maintain, and share the highest aspects of our culture with as much of the world as possible? Furthermore, wouldn't that imply that the flip side of this coin is as valid as well? That bad art, customs, principles, and culture could be the bricks in the walls between us instead of the support for the bridges that connect us. Well, I am making such ambitious claims, and to prove my point, I'll use Metallica, Ukraine, communism, peanut butter, Disney's catalog of shitty movies, and more. Honestly, it blows my mind that this isn't a far more talked about subject. Prior to me publishing this, if you would have typed into Google, what is culture, you would have had some half-ass video that would give you some boring, obnoxious simpleton's take on things that he hasn't really thought through. You won't have any issues with that here, not on this channel, for I am Clasher, and this is Drop Out Boss! That introduction's a bit much, ain't it? Oh, I love it! Whether you realize it or not, dear viewer, but the type of culture we engage in everyday life isn't just that of the collective society we're a part of. The roots of culture weave through everything from a global international scale to our churches, universities, work life, social circles, all the way down to the nuclear family. Have you ever attended a church or a class and it just felt off, yet go to another one where they teach the exact same thing and it just felt right? Yes, there could be a variety of factors that affect this, but ultimately, the culture that any organization adopts is at play. The cultures of the establishments and social circles of which I'm a part of now are awesome, but in my pursuit to find them, I've seen some wild shit. This is the night I met Diddy. Alright, never mind all that. Let's pivot to something more interesting, like Ukraine! Glorious, glorious Ukraine. Tell me, how much do you really care about Ukraine? Tell me, how many cities in Ukraine can you name before the war? Tell me, who's your favorite Ukrainian artist? Zelensky doesn't count. Tell me! Do you know anything about their culture? How about on an international scale? What is Ukraine most famous for? Now put a pin in those thoughts. Now, if Russia launched an invasion against Italy instead of Ukraine, how much would you care? I would argue you and most of the world would care a hell of a lot more. Why? What does Italy have that Ukraine doesn't? Ha! Well... I could do this all day. As glorious as this montage is, we gotta move on, and I've got a point to make. Let's run through the questions one more time. Can you name any Italian artists? What are your favorite Italian dishes? What is Italy known for on an international scale? Good luck picking out just one thing. Italian influence is everywhere, and for the most part has contributed in an enriching manner. With the Ukrainian culture, though it has its gems, to the average person, they are not as apparent. So why is this important, I hear you ask? Well, not to sound like someone pushing drugs onto a newbie, but buckle up because it's about to get deep. Because culture is a battleground that transcends the boundaries of countries. Those who fight well stand to gain global admiration, respect, appreciation, and support. And it's a hell of a lot harder to go to war with someone you admire, respect, appreciate, and support. The Italian culture has touched and enriched the lives of so many people that if Russia or any other country attacked it, the global citizen blowback for such an act will be far more profound. But Clasher, people did care about Ukraine, I hear you say. A fantastic observation, my beautiful, beautiful viewer. Yes, but there is a difference between people caring because they were told to care and a genuine caring. This is the difference between influence and inspiration. Don't believe me, you little bastion of justice, you? Well, where were you when Armenia was being invaded in 2020? Were you out in the streets protesting? Did you fly their flag in your front yard? Did you and all your celebrity friends do a bastardized cover of Imagine on behalf of the Armenian people in hopes of balancing the scales of justice through the power of song? Imagine there's no heaven. No, I didn't think so. But more on that later. So what verdict can we draw from this thought experiment? Well, my claim is, in today's world, a healthy, rich culture shared and appreciated throughout the world is vital for the preservation and long-term well-being of itself and its people. Just as it is important for a nation to have strong means of defense and critical infrastructure, a rich and inspiring culture is just as important to any organization's well-being. Clasher, you savvy son of a gun, but what is culture, I hear you say? Excellent question from an excellent person. Well, and you'd think that there would be some unanimously agreed upon definition, but to much surprise, due to the subjective nature of what falls under the encompassing umbrella of culture, defining it is easier said than done. It's like when you find the perfect wife and you're challenged to describe her. Words just don't do it justice, and any attempt feels as though it lessens or confines the beauty you're trying to convey. Ironically, this is one problem that anyone stuck with a bitch has never had to deal with. Nevertheless, I digress, and ironically, Wikipedia, the Tinder of all sources, sums up culture fairly well. Culture is a concept that encompasses the social behaviors, institutions, and norms found in human societies, as well as the knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, capabilities, attitudes, and habits of the individuals in these groups. There's a lot to unpack there, and since this channel is tilted towards the various arts, we should define art as well. Now, you'd think defining art would be about as easy as finding a good wife, but in a world of insufferable bitches, it's easier said than done. But ironically, the Tinder of resources, Wikipedia, saves us yet again. Ha! Art describes a diverse range of cultural activity centered around works utilizing creative or imaginative talents which are expected to evoke a worthwhile experience, generally through an expression of emotional power, conceptual ideas, technical proficiency, and or beauty. Oh, Wikipedia, you tease me. If we go with that definition, that just goes to show that half the shit that Disney's putting out nowadays is definitely not art.
Everybody knows you never go full retard. What do you mean?
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
You went full retard, man.
Now, fun fact about me. I was born under the sickle and hammer of the USSR. My birth ushered in a series of events that ultimately led to the collapse of the communist Soviet Empire. My birth was prophesized, written in stone, and paved the way for one of the greatest cultural moments in all of history. On September 28th, 1991, at the Tushino Airfield in Moscow, the greatest band of all time, Metallica, showed the Eastern world what Western music was all about. And it was all over after that. Newborn capitalists everywhere tore down the statues of Stalin, burned the books of Karl Marx, and punched anyone that had anything good to say about Lenin. That night, 50 million babies were conceived thanks to the power of awesome Western heavy metal. Boris Yeltsin himself said, "Well, that's it, folks. That's a wrap for this commie shit. Time to trade in that sickle and hammer for some of that red, white, and blue." And no joke, 2 months later, that's exactly what happened. The Soviet Union officially dissolved after that, and a new flag was born. Red, white, and blue. They kept out the stars because they didn't want to make it too obvious. Now, historians will tell you that everything I just said is factually incorrect, but they also think people built the pyramids, so who are you gonna believe? Those dorks know nothing. And now, in the dawn of a new Russia, Western culture was welcomed. Music, fashion, films, books, not so much. All sorts of products, just about anything American was received with admiration. Two things in particular were worth its weight in gold: peanut butter and Snickers. And for the life of me, I don't know why. And I'm not making this up. This is real. Russians saw that and they lost their goddamn minds. If you rolled into town with a Snickers, dude, your Snickers was getting sucked. Women would leave their husbands for any guy with a jar of Jif. And the husbands weren't even mad. They were like, I get it. You know, he's got peanut butter. What the fuck do I got? Work ethic? Now, in the midst of this cultural shock of the East, there grew an interesting divide between the people. There were those who felt that accepting of Western ideas and products was a form of betrayal of their bestowed legacy. There was a particular pride within the Slavic leadership, whereas the acceptance of anything from the West would implicate a failure on their part to compete or deliver something on par or greater than that of communist capabilities. To acknowledge the accomplishments of the West was to acknowledge their own systemic lacking, and this is particularly difficult considering the decades of bloodshed for the sake of the preservation of this ideal. But then again, the results speak for themselves. Metallica, peanut butter, Snickers, Steven Seagal, Corvettes, Coca-Cola, America, baby! Woo! How could you deny this? Really quick to everyone, it became apparent that to fight against the awesome power of great music, great cuisine, and compelling art isn't a fight that preserves one's own legacy, but rather a fight against the celebratory spirit of humanity. Now that was a glimpse of a little bit of the Western culture in the Eastern world. Let's flip the coin and see a little bit of the East in the West. This is me at age 4. Shortly after this picture was taken, we made our way across the pond and settled in the great state of Pennsylvania. About a year later, I stepped foot into the venomous satanic propaganda machine known as elementary school. And really fast I found out that I was not like the other kids, and the other kids knew it. They didn't know what it meant that another kid was from a different country. All they knew was that if it ain't American, it ain't right. Those little shits would rip on me from my first step onto the bus to my last step off of it. And the racism? Pfft, dude, the blacks had it easy compared to the shit that I got. At least they were American. In the entire school, there was one black kid and one Russian kid. And needless to say, we got along. Me and the black. Some of you are wondering, what was his name? I don't remember his fucking name. It was Brandon. It's very, it's just Brandon. We're still friends till this day. Anyway, all that mistreatment and all that bullying shit, all of that started to change when I discovered Jim Carrey. I could have chose a better clip. I don't think that there was anyone more likable than Jim Carrey in the 90s. He was my oasis in the desert. I would buy, rent, and steal anything with Jim in it. Watching his films, I learned a lesson that would end up shaping me my entire life. I learned that if people thought you were funny, it's impossible for them to hate you. They might not like you, but they cannot hate you. I mean, look at this. How are you going to hate someone that crawled out of a mechanical rhino's ass? I didn't understand probably about 90% of his jokes in his films, but somehow all this humor and personality, it all translated. And for the many years to come, that's exactly what I would focus on. Humor and personality. I would study his jokes, his mannerisms. I'd figure out why they worked and how they were so effective. And I would translate that to my everyday life in school. And it worked. By the time I was in high school, the hate towards me was practically non-existent. I couldn't say the same for the rest of my Russian peers, but for me, I was in the good. I knew I had achieved something when one of my classmates told me, you know, I hate the Russians, but I like you. That, to me, was gold. At this point, there were more Russian kids in school, and in comparison to them, I was by far more well-versed in Western culture, mostly in regards to films. I would sometimes borrow films from school teachers. One of them introduced me to the entire James Bond collection. Can't do that today because that's borderline grooming.
My name is Pussy Galore.
But back then it was okay. But it wasn't just movies. Us kids would swap CDs, iPods, drugs, video games, all sorts of things. And through these transactions, we would form these connections via interest. Afterwards, when news would break about some band or some movie or something, we would have things to talk about. What started with Jim Carrey and humor in elementary school, to Big Mike introducing me to Linkin Park in middle school, ultimately led to Scotty coming up to me in high school and saying, "Hey, you're alright. I like you. The rest of you Russians can fuck off." My efforts to bridge the differences between my peers and myself succeeded through mutual appreciation for the various arts. Comedy, music, films served as bridges connecting people who seemingly had little or nothing in common. That's the power of culture. That's the power of art. Now that was me on an individual level. Does this work on a larger scale? Well, dear viewer, I present to you... No, this is not a war zone or a rave in the last city of Zion, but is in fact Rammstein! Glorious Rammstein! Anyone who's experienced Rammstein in concert will tell you it is one of the most epic concerts they've ever seen in their entire life. Their style of hard-hitting industrial metal mixed with a little bit of electric groove, complemented by the harshness of the German language, all of that brought together by an over-the-top stage and production that will leave you completely forgetting anything Germany did in the past. Anything. I don't even mention it. These guys draw crowds all around the world, filling stadiums with people who don't speak a lick of German. Fascinating to be so good at your art that it transcends language in mass all over the world. Furthermore, on the web, you will find testimonials of many people who took on learning German because they were inspired by this band. Think about that. Their art has other people learning their language in order to appreciate their art in a more fulfilling manner. You still think culture doesn't matter? Well, then how about Armenia? I told you we'd come back to it. When war between Armenia and Azerbaijan broke out in 2020, no one paid much attention due to a virus of unspecified origins. Due to this lack of attention, Armenian LA band System of a Down did a cover of John Lennon's Imagine. I'm just joking. That would have been gay. Instead, like real artists, they dropped 2 sick tracks and a music video on us. This took the music world by storm because it was the first time we heard anything from them in over 15 years. Fans everywhere, myself included, thought that we would never see new music from them. The music video they released featured real footage of their people's struggle. This, combined with the powerful lyrics like, "The big gun tells you what your life is worth. What do we deserve before we end the earth? And they protect the land," backed with a catchy riff and melody, helped raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for the wounded and the displaced. The fact that this happened and still hardly anyone talks about this or remembers it just goes to show how bonkers 2020 really was. Examples of art propelled by culture, compelling and inspiring people to do something for the benefit of a different country or people is more common now than ever before. This is in part to how interconnected we are thanks to the internet. However, hatred and misinformation against a country or people can just as easily be spread as well. But we combat this with discourse and sharing powerful and compelling art. Our art and our culture are battlegrounds. We cannot yield these grounds, nor may we put forth shit like a banana duct taped to a canvas and call it deep and insightful. To call something as such art doesn't broaden or enrich our cultural achievements, but rather it dilutes and cheapens. The easiest thing we can point to where this has been played out is no other than Disney. The House of Mouse, once regarded as pioneers of creativity and storytelling, now is just an eye roll and a joke. The success of just about any of the satanic vile filth that Disney projectile vomits onto a screen now depends more on the power of the brand instead of creating something so good it could stand on its own. And unfortunately, all that garbage was made here in the States. Therefore, on an international scale, it will be perceived that that is a reflection of ourselves and our values. Before, you'd walk into a bar in Japan and Michael Jackson would be on TV. You go to Europe and people were wearing our blue jeans. Now, the market of culture sharing has taken off. K-pop and Korean cinema is a rising tide in the US. Shows like Squid Games gave audiences a breath of fresh air in regards to creativity and originality. Parasite won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture, in 2020. Korean cinema has entered the chat and it is talking. Oldboy is one of the best revenge films of all time, and when compared to the American remake of it, the original definitely stands preferable. Oldboy is a savage revenge flick that will definitely have you rethinking all the ways that you can get back at anyone that's ever wronged you. And for this reason alone, it's worth the watch. Japan is another culturally rich country worth diving into. However, its obsession with anime, along with the rising popularity of anime amongst adults and children, is something I don't think I'll ever understand collectively. Having said that, Blue Eye Samurai was awesome.
Shivoham, 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 Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham.
Bollywood was, for the longest time, a punchline to the West. Their stereotypical tropes of breaking into song and dance throughout the film was laughable to those outside the culture. Along with absurd stunts and romance stories that will put a restraining order on you just for watching it, Bollywood films have a distinct style unto their own that is so different it cannot be mistaken for anyone else. All this together made for films difficult for those outside of Indian culture to appreciate. That is until Triple R came along. Or RRR. That is until this fucking movie came along. This fucking film takes all those tropes I mentioned and spins them in a way that will have you laughing, cheering, and even singing in a most culturally appropriating way ever. This fucking film will bridge your artistic appreciation and Indian culture together in such a spectacular fashion that you will be thrilled when an Indian spammer calls you. If this fucking film proves anything, it's that Indian culture and Bollywood, in terms of films, have a lot to say to the Western world. So what to make of all this, I hear you say? Well, dear viewer, after this, all we're really left with is the human experience. Who knows what the fuck this whole existence thing is all about, but one thing's for sure, I'd rather live in a party house than a butcher house. Instead of coming up with interesting and clever ways to off ourselves, let's focus some of that energy into putting forth meaningful, awe-inspiring culture that'll compel us to get along instead. Well, that's it for today. If you made it this far, thank you. Now put your phone down and go outside.